Hi, this is Kathy with City Farmhouse Studio. Today I want to talk to you about the Main Street summer top. This nice little short sleeve top has a curved hem, some garter row stitches for edgings, and some shaping done with simple bind offs, increases, decreases, and also some short rows. So stick around and I'll show you exactly all the steps you need to know in order to make this wonderful top. For the yarn, I use from Yarnspirations the Patons linen. It is a 3.5 ounce, 100 gram skein, 275 yards in it, 65% cotton, 35% linen, and it is a category 3 light DK yarn. You will also need 2 sets of needles, a size 4 in US and also a size 5. And that is because the garter stitch creates a little bit wider of a stitch structure. So to make sure that those stitches going from garter stitch to stockinette stay within the same gauge, you do the garter stitch with those smaller needles. So I have circular needles here. You can do these on straights because we are not knitting in the round. So to begin, you start out with a long tail cast on, and you go ahead and cast on the specified number of stitches needed for your size. The sizes do include ease, so for me, I made the size medium and I added 3 to 4 inches up on the bust for what my actual bust is to the garment size. And that is just my preference on how I like my tops to fit. I like a little bit more room and not super form fitting. So to get you a gauge of which one you would prefer, measure a top that you like to the fitting of it in a similar weight of material. You know, a jersey knit cotton t-shirt isn't going to have as much bulk as a super thick sweater. So find something you like, measure it, and then kind of add or take away depending on the thickness of the garment if you need to. But that will give you a little bit of an idea of how much ease you prefer in your sweaters or the specified top you are making. So once you have your long tail cast on complete with the number of stitches you need, go ahead and knit that first row. This will be starting out for the 6 rows of garter stitch. So for garter stitch, again, you knit every row. So it's 6 rows of just knit stitches. So there I have finished my first knit row, and now for the second row of garter stitch, I want to knit this row. And so you continue this knit each row for an additional 4 times after this row for a total of 6 rows. And once I have that completed, I'll switch back and show you. So once you've finished your 6 rows of garter stitch, go ahead and transfer up to your US 5, your larger size needle, what you get to make gauge. And you're going to begin the short rows for the curved hem. So your first row will tell you to go ahead and knit so many stitches, and that just gets you to where that first bottom line will start to start the curve. So just follow the patterns for your size, knit over the specified number of stitches. It will also tell you how many stitches are left unworked. So depending which way you prefer to count. Okay, so once you have completed knitting all of those stitches, you're going to want to take this next loop over, pull your yarn forward, and pass that stitch right back so that you have wrapped that stitch, so that whenever you come back and knit this stitch, you're also going to knit that wrap so that it does not create a hole in your garment. So now on the next side it says turn your work and purl. So we're going to pull our yarn forward and I'm going to purl the number that it says for me to do. Okay, so once you have the stitches completed, you want to move this next stitch over, pull your working strand behind, pass the loop back, and then we're going to go ahead and finish there to wrap your stitch. And you continue working this method of wrapping the stitches. This next one is for knitting back across, and we're going to stop a little bit further towards the edge, so we'll need to pick up that loop. So again, you start knitting your numbers. So I've come to the stitch that has the wrap. You want to pick that stitch up, go into the loop you need to work, pull a stitch. This is where I always struggle. Pull a stitch through both, and then you slide it off. And see that connects right in that hole to pull it tight so you don't get a stitch or you don't get a hole in that edge. So remember, we need to move a little bit further past. I've knitted all the stitches it said for me to knit. I have the number unworked. And again, I'm going to wrap that stitch. So whenever I turn to purl, just like that. Same type of process for purl rows. Now I do purl a little different, so my stitches lay reverse, but it's the same method. Just make sure you're picking up, going through the right stitches or the right orientation of your stitch on your needle. Okay. You can start to tell the stitches look a little different underneath whenever you're getting to the wrap stitch from below. So again, you want to pick that up. Purl them both together and finish purling the number you need for that row. Okay, again, wrap that stitch. So whenever I turn, my yarn is already in the back and it's wrapped. I want to knit. This time I'm skipping ahead. You'll use more rows, but mine will go all the way to the edge of the row. So you continue doing the specified stitches and rows needed for your curve. And you can already start to see how the short rows creates a nice gradual slope. This really helps the front and the back lay down. Kind of gives you a little more coverage on the belly. I really have noticed a lot of the shirts I wear most from a production standpoint, from stores, have curved hems. So looking at why, what made them so much more flattering on my shape is this curved hem. There it is. I want to go through that. Make a knit. And there it fell behind. So it just kind of holds that previous row up into this new row and not making a hole. And now we'll purl back across to finish this side. Okay. And there's my wrap and my stitch. Make sure you go into the correct loop of your stitch structure so that it doesn't twist your stitch. And then how the front side, that wrap lays on the front, your purl side, on the knit side of the fabric, like we did the row before, the loop, the wrap lays on the back side of what you're looking at. So since we're on the purl face, that wrap lays towards you, so you know you got it right. It won't be visible from the front side of the fabric. You finish the row in purl. So once you've finished your short rows, the instructions will tell you to go ahead and complete so many rows of straight stockinette. And then we're going to begin shaping from your hips into your waist. And all that is decreasing a stitch on each end of the row. So by knitting two together, and then you knit across to the other end. So then once you get to the end of the row and you have two stitches remaining, you would slip knit and then slip that one back over to decrease that one stitch. The instructions then will tell you to knit so many rows in straight stockinette and then repeat those decreases. Now sometimes you would be decreasing on knit rows and sometimes you will be decreasing on purl rows. So if you need to decrease on a purl row, I'll start with the slip, purl, slip to decrease that stitch, purl all the way back across, until you have two stitches remaining. Okay, so once two stitches remain, purl those two together. So there you can see we've started to come in on both sides to create the waist shaping. Again, after you would purl that row, you would knit so many rows and repeat however many times you need to get as many stitches as your sweater top says that you need to do. So once you finish all of your repeats, you will now need to increase up to your bust. And for increases, you want them also at the edge of your garment. To increase, I want to add one more stitch onto this side of the garment. So I have what's on the needle, I have the loop that it was made into, and the one below it I will pick up and place on my needle to create that next new stitch into, and then I will go ahead and work one more. So that is the increase of one. Go ahead down to the end of the row. So with this one, you knit that last stitch, go down below, pick up one loop, and make the stitch into that. So there you can see how it's branching off of the side. And then your instructions will tell you based on your size, how many rows to knit or work in stockinette. So I'll get a couple rows to show you if you need to increase on a purl side. So now on a purl row, to increase, I have the loop that's on my needle. I don't want to pick up the loop that it is worked through. I want to pick up the loop below that, making sure my yarn is forward. So I will purl one stitch, that, purl a next stitch, and then continue purling on down to the end of the row to make the other purl for the last increase of this row. Now, this is just one way you can do increases. You can do make ones, which lie in between stitches. So whatever your preferred method of increasing works just as well as the other. They just lay differently on and where they lay in the garment. I like them on the edge so that all those increases can be hidden on the seam. But I also like to say that whatever way you like to knit and prefer to enjoy it, do that. All right, so now we'll purl the last stitch, and I will pick up the one below that one was made into. And purl into that. So that is my increase. And then, like I was saying, all of this will be included in the seam whenever you sew the front and the back together. So you will not see those little offsets. All right, so once you've finished all of your increases back up, you will knit a certain number of rows, and that now gets you to where you need to be for underneath the arms. In this section, all you do are rows of bind off stitches. So just as you would at the end of a project bind off, you're going to bind off a certain number of stitches. So I knit 2, slip that first stitch over, and that's a bind off of 1. So I will knit another one, bind off, It's a bind off of 2. And I will go ahead and do one more. So that is a bind off of 3. And I want to go on down to the end of the row, just of knitting. Once you've finished that row, you're going to turn your work, and now you need to bind off this edge to match this side of the garment. So again, we will bind off 3 for this example. So I will purl 2 and then slip the first one over. So that's a decrease of 1. Decrease 2. And that is my decrease of 3. And then it says to finish the row. The next step will tell you to decrease another set of numbers smaller than that first set. You work it exactly the same way, and then it will tell you if you need to repeat it any. If the instructions tell you that you only need to repeat it once, that first time that you did the number, that is the number, the only time you will need to repeat it. I have given you row counts and stitches so you can double check to make sure you are where you need to be. And then you will, once you finish all of those repeats, you will then bind off 1 stitch on each edge and repeat that for a number of times. Once you've finished all of those, it will tell you to knit and stockinette a few more rows. And what this will do is get your front panel depth or length from where all the bind offs are for under the sleeve. You will then work to where you'll start the decreases for the neck. And just like your short rows at the bottom, the garment will tell you, the instructions will tell you to knit so many stitches. And once you've knit those defined number of stitches, we'll start doing short rows just like what we did before, where you wrap your stitch, the next unworked, slip it back over, turn the work, and then you will purl back to the edge of the row. The next line will tell you to knit that row, leaving 3 more stitches unworked. So from the back, you can tell which stitch I've wrapped. So that was my first unworked, and I want to leave 3 more. So you can separate them with your fingers. You can use a stitch marker, but you knit to that point. All right, so now you can see here is that wrapped stitch. It has the 2 pulling along the loop. So that was my first unworked before. I want to leave 3 more left unworked. But I still want to wrap that first unworked stitch. And then I'll turn and purl back to the edge. So you continue repeating that a certain number of times, then you'll work to leave 2 left unworked, and then you'll repeat leaving 1 left unworked. and then knit a few straight rows, and that will get you to wear of just those stitches that were previously being worked, not having a wrap. And now you would want to start your shoulder slope decreases. And again, you're going to do nothing new. You start with binding off 2 stitches. So just like at the underarms, you bind off 1, bind off 2, and now I want to knit to that first wrapped stitch. Okay. Since I'm not adding any other needles or any other stitches unworked, I just turn and I'm going to purl to the end of the row until there are 2 stitches left. And I want to purl those 2 together so that I have a decrease of 1. Turn your work and you will repeat that so many times. So bind off 2. Knit to that row that is still worked on below. And this you can, once you get rows worked, so you knit to that edge, turn your work, purl back across, leaving 2 more left unworked, so that again you can decrease that last one on the edge. This gives you a nice curve, so it sits really flat on your shoulder. The 2 on one row and then decreasing 1 on the purl side. That's just so you don't get that stair step of a decrease like we did underneath the arm, but a nice even slope so that that seam that sits on your shoulder will be nice and smooth and not all jagged under your arm, which you can kind of hide under your arm a little bit easier, but you won't have those knobs for the decreases. Once you've finished all of those repeats, you will bind off those stitches that are still in work, that you are still working, that are on this side before the wrapped stitches. And then once you have that line, you can either cut your yarn or leave it still into work, because you will be picking up from here and working the neckline. But now we need to work on this side of the neck. So I do have an additional ball of yarn that I can work from. So with the circulars, I'm just going to pull these through. And using another end of yarn, You repeat the same instructions as before. However, this time you will need to purl whenever it said knit and knit whenever it said purl. So I will purl the specified number of stitches to get to that center stitch. Once you have completed the defined number of stitches, again, you want to wrap that last stitch. And then now, instead of purling back across, you knit back across to the other edge. So you continue working those short rows, decreasing the 3, then the 2, and then the 1, looking at those wrapped stitches being your marker for the last stitch being left in work or being left unworked. Just like before, looking at the stitches worked. This stitch has the 2 loops, so that is the first stitch unworked. I will leave 3 more unworked. So I'll purl across to that. Okay. So the first unworked, the 3 now new left unworked, and wrap that stitch. Oh. So it goes in between and knit across. So nothing is new. You've done all of this before for short rows. You continue repeating that until you get to the shoulder slope decreases. And just like all the other ones, to bind off. Purl 2. Slip 1 over. Purl another one. Slip that stitch over. So that was my decrease of 2. And then I want to purl the stitches that are still being worked. So there's the first stitch that has the 2, the stitch below in the wrap. So I'll turn my work, knit back. So very self-explanatory. I'm going to go ahead and bind off this next row. It will be uneven compared to the other edge. Yours will be even, but for time and yarn. You'll bind off. Just like what was before. We did get new kitties, so this is Copper making her debut entrance. So nothing too crazy, nothing too complicated, as long as you read your stitches. And if it doesn't lay right once you've completed those decreases or picking up the wraps, just kind of back yourself out that stitch. Try it again. Or if you drop stitches, just back yourself out and try it again. All right, last one. So once you're done with that, go ahead and bind off that section of yarn. And we will go back to this edge. So again, I've left this section of yarn attached. The instructions will tell you to pick up so many stitches along this edge, and this is to create our neckline banding for the 6 rows of garter stitch that go along the neckline. So I will count this one that's on my needle as 1. I go in between that first column of stitches and pick up the number that is defined. Now your row gauge and your stitch gauge are different, so that's why you can't pick up 1 to 1. So now you can see as those are knit, they will lie flat and clean to that knit row. Well, not that one. There we go. So I had an extra portion of a stitch in there and I would get a little bump. Now I want to knit across the ones that have been held and the wrapped. So I want to pick up the wrap and knit through the stitch that it is being wrapped and keep on going across. So these were just stitches that were put in hold. There's a wrap, so I'm going to lift it, work the stitch as normal along with that wrapped yarn portion. And you can see how it is laying in the back, and that is what I want. So you continue on. Here's the last stitch and it has a wrap. So you knit that through both. This was where I started. So as I worked it, that stitch fell to the front. Now again, I want to pick up along this edge the number needed. And actually, I skipped a section in the instructions. Since this is for garter, you need to transfer back down to your smaller stitch, your smaller needles. So now that I've knit that first row, hopefully yours is in the correct needles, I go ahead and knit row 2. So now you can see how the neckline goes. Go ahead and knit your 6 rows of garter stitch. And then again, you will bind off. I do the same type of bind offs like I did on the shoulders. And that way I can really control this tightness of that last stitch, to where it won't be too loose and it won't be too tight. So there you can start to see your neck edge starting to form. So once you do your 6 rows, you can see the bind off edge, all the shaping along the sleeve or the shoulder, so that it's a nice smooth edge. The sleeve bind offs along with the shaping along the edges for the waist. So the back also starts out with the 6 rows of garter stitch. Remember, it is a different ratio of increases so that you get a little bit longer of that curve diameter. It's a little more deep of a curve. You then proceed the same way to bind off for your waistline, increase to underarms, the exact same bind offs for underarms. The only thing then different is you work more rows up straight so that your neckline for the back is higher up. Also, how on the front you did the bind offs at the neck and then did the shoulder, you will be doing them both simultaneously. So you will start by binding off 2 stitches, working over, wrapping a stitch, and then coming back across, binding off that 1 stitch, doing your 2 bind off, coming in, wrapping a stitch, working back, decreasing 1 at the end, back and forth. Same thing as you did on the front. You can keep it live to pick up later, or completely bind off so that you can pick up as a purl, bind off 2, come in, wrap your stitch, come across, decrease 1, wrap your stitch, come across, bind off. So same thing, just you got to do them both. It's written out in the instructions, but then you again pick up just a few stitches and do your 6 rows of garter for the neckline. Your sleeve cap has very much similar instructions. Long tail cast on, 6 rows. You do not have any short rows, yay! But you start with bind offs, back and forth, just like you did under the sleeves. But then you do another round of it, of bind offs, to get this curved edge that goes up along the top of your sweater. So for your sleeve cap. So there you have your Main Street knit summer top. I really hope that you enjoy wearing it and making it just as much as I have. Please be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss out on any other great tutorials or knitting patterns from City Farmhouse Studio. Thanks again. Bye.